But I also, having been a rabbi for 25 years, get that the end is near. The end is near for all of us. And I don't mean that in a comedic way. I mean that I might not be here tomorrow. You might not be here tomorrow. I could live to be 100. You could live to be 100. But we can't be sure. And if you don't do the work, if not now, when? If not now, when?
My mom has stage 4 cancer in her bones and in her breast. My dad's disease was 15 years, he died of ALS. I made a podcast about death, seemed like the thing to do. And if you're sad by all of this, well, you're gonna die too. Hey, happy week all or sad week to you all, depending on how you're doing. It's Charles. Who else but Charles? If you're new, what's up? I'm Chelsea London Lloyd, and every week we interview comedians and wellness experts about the losses of their parents and siblings. A lot going on for me, but I shot 2 commercials. Win, going through a breakup, lose. Or is it a win? I shared more on my Instagram. It's a picture of us at a baseball game, and I used the hashtag Breaking Open to talk about how I feel like moving through 7 years of relationship with someone is in and of itself a form of breaking open rather than breaking up. It also fucking sucks and is a form of grief. So if you're going through a breakup, check out that post on the gram. Just got back from Santa Fe doing some stand-up at the Cloud Top Comedy Festival. Beautiful city, first time there. Feeling good about that. Now today, let's talk about how psychedelics can offer a way into and through grief, shall we? We have Rabbi Sydney Mintz. We'll talk about the relationship between mysticism and healing and how might psychedelics be a catalyst for them both. If you've ever been interested in such, this is the episode for you. Rabbi Mintz's one-woman show, You May Think I'm Funny, But It's Not, premiered and sold out at the Marsh Theater in San Francisco. They are a thespian of sorts in their own right, as well as a rabbi based out of the Bay Area where I'm from. I am just stoked that we got to chat. So thanks for being with us. Let's pop right into the interview. And I'll see you next week. Yodo, you only die once. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to talk with you. I love that we both have Bay Area roots, and I'm excited to talk about all of the things. Rabbi Sydney, so appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, Chelsea. I'm excited too.
Of course, and I love that you're on a houseboat in Sausalito. I know exactly where you are. That is so cool. How long have you lived on a houseboat?
We moved onto the houseboat in the middle of COVID just this past April. So we're newbies on the water.
Amazing. So far, so good. What is that experience like? It's so interesting.
So far, it's been an incredible and incredibly unique experience. It's very diverse on the docks. There's people who have lived here from the time the boats first showed up here in Sausalito as livable liveaboards in the 1970s. So they've been living here for the last 30, 40, 50 years, which is exciting and feels like a part of a culture I did not even know existed. And the diversity of people, there's queer people and there's Jews, and it's like a multi-generational community and a little bit like living on a waterfront kibbutz, because you know, what I've learned is I have to add about 10 or 15 minutes to anywhere I want to go because it's not a street, it's a dock. And you're always bumping into people and helping them grab their groceries or their recycling or just checking in. And nobody likes it when you're talking on the phone when you're walking down the dock because it means you're not there to talk and check out what's going on.
Wow, what a nice community aspect that, you know, we don't get in our day-to-day lives in this way. That's really beautiful.
Yeah, I'm you know, some people have said to me, well, you're part of such a huge synagogue community. Did you really want to enter another community where you're so public? And I didn't know. I didn't even know that about the docks. And I feel like one of the episodes of just the past few weeks is my neighbor 2 doors down was having heart problems. And she lives, when I think of her, she lives alone on a very small houseboat. And when she was taken by one of our neighbors to the hospital, when they asked her, do you live alone? She said, no, I don't. I live in a community of people who take care of me and are interested in me. And so I love the fact that there's kids on the dock that are 10 years old and there's people in their 90s on the dock, and people are really caring about one another at whatever stage their life is.
That's really cool. I love that that's what she said. No, I do not. That's really beautiful. I remember I'm having this image come to me. I babysat for some family who lived on a houseboat in Sausalito. And I think the little boy would like joke with me and be like, if I don't like what we're doing today, I'm going to cut the rope and our boat's going to go out to sea and you're going to get in trouble. And I knew I was, a teenager, and I was like, I don't believe you. But there was 2% of me that was like, is that an option? I am terrified. Also, I think another family I babysat on those houseboats had a snake, and I was extremely terrified of snakes. And it was a little bit alarming because it was like we were on this boat with this snake, and those are my 2 memories of Sausalito houseboats.
Mm-hmm. It's always exciting on the houseboat community.
Always exciting. Well, I'm really excited to talk with you about all of the things today. I know you have a lot of experience helping other people, connecting with spirituality, comedy, all of the things, psychedelics. I feel like there's so many roads we could go down. But first, one question I ask all of my guests on the show is about your goldfish moment. And your goldfish moment is the first time you thought about or conceptualized death in some way. Is there something that comes to mind in your childhood when I say that? Goldfish moment. Did your goldfish die? Goldfish moment. Did it make you cry?
I would say the first time that I conceptualized death was when I was probably 6 years old, when I had an actual death in my family of my Uncle Maury, who was my grandmother's brother. And it was the first memory of a funeral and of somebody no longer being in this world. And it was very confounding to me because I knew he was in this box inside of what was a hearse, inside of a big black car. And I remember everybody getting very dressed up to go and to, as my family said, go say goodbye to Uncle Maury. But there was no explanation beyond go say goodbye to Uncle Maury and then seeing this box. And what I do remember about it is that my grandmother remembered between the funeral and the cemetery that he had wanted my brother to have his cufflinks that were his father's, but they had mistakenly put him in a suit with those cufflinks in the casket in the hearse.
Oh no.
And so there was this whispering going on, and I wasn't aware of what it actually meant. But then somebody got into the back of the hearse, and I remember them coming out with the cufflinks. And my goldfish moment was, I guess they don't need cufflinks wherever he's going. But I didn't know where that was. I just knew it was goodbye. My brother was getting the cufflinks, and there was something with this big black vehicle.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that. It does seem like, around 5, 6, 7, 8 is when you can start to think about it in this new way. So I always love hearing people's stories. Not funny, but you have to laugh of like, okay, the cufflinks, where are they? Oh. I would love to paint a little bit more of a picture for our listeners. Can you talk about where you grew up, who you grew up with, and can you walk us through the timeline of your journey entering your world as a rabbi?
Sure. I grew up not on a houseboat in Sausalito. I grew up in the North Shore suburbs of Chicago. So I'm truly a Midwestern girl. And I grew up with a very extended family. And the generation before mine actually all lived together in Chicago, surrounded by one another in the buildings that they lived in. And so all of my great aunts and uncles lived in the same block. And my grandmother would tell me about opening her window and yelling out to her aunts and uncles that were kitty corner, who were eating breakfast in the kitchen kitty corner to hers in the next building. And that evolved into less of that kind of a web of intergeneration, but it's different than today because my great grandma, my nanny, I'm 4th generation Chicagoan. So there's a lot of Chicagoans who make up my family and who are still there. My great grandmother lived with my grandmother and my mother and aunt and uncle. So I was very involved in a 4-generation family. And when my great grandmother died, we moved in with my grandparents. So at first I spent a lot of time with my great grandmother, my grandparents, and my parents. And my parents divorced and we all moved in with my grandparents. So it was very unusual in the 1970s to still have a 3-generation family or to be living with your parents with your own children. And that was something that really informed me because we had a family business and we had family dinners together every night. And I was very interested, not just that goldfish moment, but I was very interested in Judaism from a young age. And it's something that really grounded me. My family's relationship to the synagogue, to the Jewish community, to Israel was something that was very primary for me as a kid. And I would say that my life changed a lot when my parents got divorced when I was 8, and the synagogue felt almost like a third parent to me.
That's really beautiful. Where in Chicago was the first temple that you went to in Chicago proper? Were you in the suburbs?
In Chicago proper, I was named at Temple Sholem in downtown in Chicago. And when my family moved to the suburbs, I grew up at North Shore Congregation Israel, which is this beautiful pagoda looking sanctuary and synagogue right on Lake Michigan.
Beautiful. I love that. I'm going to ask my boyfriend. He's originally from Chicago. His family is all Jewish Chicagoans as well. I think they're more now in Skokie and Deerfield. And do you know those places, suburbs of Chicago?
I know them very well. Skokie is, so all of those suburbs have a lot of Jews in the community.
Yes.
And I will say my other funny moment of recollection about synagogue life is that my father was a great adventurer and a Renaissance man. And so we would spend weekends with him sailing. He had a sailboat. And on the weekends when we went to religious school at the synagogue, he would sail us down and he would anchor out in front of the synagogue. And in the morning, he would dinghy us in a little Zodiac. He would give us an old fashioned huge walkie-talkie. We'd run up the hill, go to religious school, and then we'd walkie-talkie him. And he'd come back and pick us up. And then it was like, our carpool was 36-foot Choi Lee midshipman boat that he would take us up and down Lake Michigan on.
You must have been the coolest people at Hebrew school. Was everyone like, that's so awesome, you are taking a boat here?
I was super nerdy and unpopular, so people didn't even know, except they wanted to know why I was such a weirdo walking around with remember how, I mean, you're younger than me, so you don't know, but like walkie-talkies and cell phones used to be like bigger and heavier than bricks.
Wow, that's so specific. I love that. Bigger and heavier than bricks. I love it. That's awesome. I have to share this with you, not just because you're a rabbi, but because we're talking about this. Okay, wait, I'm trying to think. I'm like, is this more fun if we make it a guessing game? As to where I met my partner, knowing I'm Jewish, do you have any guesses?
I would say if it was a weird place, it was church.
Okay, guess one. Love it. Let's do three guesses. That's guess one.
All right. Well, given your interest in the subject, did you meet him at a funeral?
Love that. Guess two.
Number three, a lot of young people these days meet online.
I love it. Those are really good guesses. Obsessed with all of them. We met on Birthright, so that's our story.
I can't believe I didn't guess Birthright. What's wrong with me? So many people meet on Birthright, especially two Jews together who are your age. That's fabulous.
It's fabulous. Six years going strong. So they got what they wanted there. There's another couple from our trip that is engaged and all of the things. We started out with 4 couples after that trip. We're down to 2, but mission accomplished, I will say. And they're getting smart. It was the entertainment industry themed trip. So we all lived near each other and worked in the same field. Smart, right? I mean, hello.
Very smart. I have some issues and questions about, the Birthright mission and what young Jews who are exposed to Israel through Birthright get or don't get. But I have to say the idea of the themes, it's almost like Fantasy Island and Love Boat together in the Promised Land.
Sure. Absolutely. And hey, and thanks for your transparency there. I think there's a lot of complicated nuances with all of the things in our lives at this point that we could go into, but you're right. I mean, even the point of connecting people, we kind of roll our eyes because we don't like that we are a stereotype of what they wanted. That kind of is uncomfortable. And yet also any adults traveling for free, someone's going to get together. So, right. So anyways, very interesting. Had to share that. We're going on a little detour. I would love to hear, Rabbi Sydney, about your experience with psychedelics in relationship to grief. I know you were hosting this really fascinating workshop recently. Someone had sent it to me, and I would love to hear about how that went and how you started doing this.
I have to say that I am not a psychonaut. I'm not somebody who has a great deal of experience in the psychedelic world. And in fact, in the way that I grew up, I was born in 1966. I grew up in the 70s with, for people in my generation, this is your brain. And there was an egg, and this is your brain on drugs. And then they'd crack the egg and put it in the frying pan. And so when I was growing up, there was no delineation between aspirin, Tylenol, Advil, cocaine, marijuana, psilocybin, LSD, heroin. So it almost was like everything, and cigarettes and alcohol in there. So all of those things were in this one compartment of evil and will fry your brain. And as you know, for years, psychedelics were illegal, non-FDA approved and illegal substances. And what got me interested is there is an organization I'm involved with called Reimagine End of Life. And I did several interviews with a dear friend of mine, Dr. Richard Miller, who wrote a book called Psychedelic Medicine. And that started expanding me into reading Michael Pollan's books and to getting more interested in the healing aspects and the spiritual aspects of psychedelics, not the party aspect of it or the tripping aspect of it that people, I think, get afraid of in our culture, but in the realm of healing, the realm of spiritual journeying. And I started to do some research about the way that indigenous cultures use psychedelic medicine and have for thousands of years, and what the cutoff point was for us. And what I started recognizing over the past 5 years is that there was actual research being done that was approved by the government and by the FDA that was going on at Johns Hopkins and all over the country in very reputable institutions. And what I started seeing is my own congregants and friends becoming very inquisitive about encountering death and encountering grief and anxiety and depression and utilizing psychedelics for therapeutic reasons, for healing, and with guides, of course, with therapists, with doctors. And since then, it's interesting because several people just in the last year have called me discreetly, who are my congregants, and said, will you give me your permission to use ketamine for my depression?
Hey, popping in here to share how much I've personally benefited from individual counseling, specifically virtually. During the pandemic, I opted for online therapy. I'm not going to lie. I thought it would be really fucking weird. At first it was, until I found the right fit. I feel that the right fit in therapy is so important. And yes, a bit of an eye roll that you have to try 2 or 3 people, but hey, it's like dating. The first one's not always the perfect fit. And I was lucky enough to find the perfect fit right away. I used BetterHelp myself. This was before I partnered with them, which is affordable and private therapy virtually. You can do couples therapy, individual therapy, text therapy, phone therapy, or Zoom therapy. I did Zoom. If you're more into a phone moment, that exists too. But I know that therapy is time consuming. A lot of people listening to this are busy gals, guys, and folks on the go. I remember when I went to in-person therapy in Los Angeles before the pandemic, oftentimes I'd have to reschedule due to a last-minute audition or work obligation. With virtual therapy, I've found that I can always find an hour in my week, and you can even reschedule online if something comes up. There's an easy-to-use platform similarly to Calendly or Acuity where you just pick your own times. I feel like you guys have heard me mention the benefits of therapy time and time again, so I'll try not to repeat myself too much, but just truly, when I lost my dad, there was so much going on. I never went to therapy until years later when my mom was diagnosed, and I only wish that I had gone sooner. Now going through a breakup, I'm in a very vulnerable place and I need regular support from a licensed professional. My friends and family have been awesome, but it's beyond what they can provide, in my opinion, due to how much heartache I'm going through regarding this grief. So if you'd like 10% off your first month, you can try it at betterhelp.com/DOL, as in dying of laughter. So the letter D is in dog, O is in ostrich, L is in love ya. Yes, I just threw that in. It's just a service I genuinely believe in, and I wanted to pass that on to you. So whether you try BetterHelp, an in-person therapist, or you find another way to express yourself with a licensed professional.
Will you give me your permission? It's not even permission. It's not like a vote or a veto, but they wanted me to weigh in the spiritual sense of, right, is this okay? And I think 10 years ago, I would have said, I don't know, that sounds risky. That doesn't even sound like medicine. Today, I'm able to say, are you working with a doctor? Are you working with a therapist? Yes, I think that these applications for healing, and especially in this work that I do with Reimagine of encountering grief, encountering your own mortality. And there's some great films out. Just watch Fantastic Fungi, which is now on Netflix, about that. Just demystifies mushrooms in general. But I do think that there is a renaissance going on, and there's a cutting edge medical part of the healing with psychedelics.
Really well said. And I appreciate your perspective on this and sharing that there is research being done. It seems like psychedelics are exploding, for lack of better words. Like, it seems like it's this boom of new information and people are getting really excited about it. And yet I also know there are plenty of people who are, like you're saying, unclear or afraid or don't really know what to do. I personally have not experimented with psychedelics, but my partner has, and like a lot of my friends have long before these past few years. And they've always just kind of done it. And I've been like, that's just never going to be for me. And now I'm at a place where I'm like, this is interesting to me, right? I think a lot of people are kind of turning that page. And I think it's really cool that you as a rabbi are turning that page, because then it gives, like you're saying, this spiritual permission to other people. Can you talk about an example as to when you might have encountered a psychedelic personally and what that effect was on you?
There is still a great fear around psychedelics. And especially as a rabbi, when I have talked about it, there's a nervousness about kids listening. And somehow that the idea of a rabbi talking about it will make it a gateway drug. And can people get addicted to psychedelics? And all of the things that come from not being exposed and ignorance around it as a scientific field today. So I think we're at the very beginning, even though you're right, Chelsea, it is exploding. People are investing in psychedelic startups. There's, the use in spirituality and in healing. But I think that I'm hesitant to talk about my own experience.
Sure. Completely fair. Yeah. And thank you for saying that and having your boundary. My friend who does psychedelics all the time, like we always joke, like we're just like two sides of the same coin. Like we relate on so many levels, but she's extremely, has done psychedelics many, many times and all of the things and had all of the journeys. And I'm always just like, please tell me about that. I would love to hear about that. I have never done that. So she was the one who sent me the event you were doing, because she was like, hey, this combines Judaism and death and psychedelics. You're going to want to check this out. And I was like, oh, we're niching down, right? There's getting these more specific courses. Can you talk about what your course was like with exploring psychedelics through grief? How did that program go? And what did that look like if you signed up?
One thing I want to say is that I'm very interested in the psychedelic space. And because I'm not a psychonaut, I'm still opening myself up. I have not availed myself of the medicine in a way that I think I will in the future. And what was fascinating for me was looking at people who were given diagnoses that were terminal. So they knew that the end was either near or far, but it was going to happen, either in the long term or the short term. And looking at the impact on their own understanding of death, their own understanding of grief, the depression and anxiety they were experiencing, and then their families' experience, the people around them who were caretakers, family members, friends, of their death and of their end of life. And that seemed to me incredibly profound, because it shifted people into a place where, when you think about psychedelics, you think that you're on a trip. And in some ways, the trip is out there in some other realm, when in fact, many people describe their trips as an interior journey. You are tripping and you are journeying inside in another realm that you had not realized was a part of your consciousness. So that was one of the draws to me, is this idea of expanded consciousness and of going through, for the last 25 years, people who were extremely fearful, anxious, and depressed about their end of life and life ending, and then also the fear of the suffering that goes along with that. And that somehow that pain and that suffering was translating into pain and suffering for their loved ones because of their kind of inadequacy or a lack of ability to deal with it. So for me, the interviews that I've done and the presentations that I've offered at the synagogue and through Reimagine, for me, it was an opening and a letting go of my own fear and this idea of being risk averse when it comes to something that I felt was dangerous my whole life, especially from where I grew up, into something where I started really seeing in concrete ways how transformational the experiences in psychedelic medicine have been and continue to be for people who are open to it. I do want to say there was, one of my congregants, George Sarlo, appeared in the New York Times, and he is a Holocaust survivor in his 80s, and quite publicly lived with an intense amount of depression and anxiety as a result of his experiences as a child. And it wasn't until a friend of his said, I'm going to take you to Costa Rica and we're going to do psychedelic trip, a healing together, that he came out publicly and started talking about how he was able to confront his father's death, how he was able to confront his own mortality and what the Jewish people had gone through and how personal and painful and intimate that was to him. And he emerged from it a completely different human being, having encountered a different self going through the journey. And for me, listening to an 83, 84-year-old man on the bima with me at the synagogue speaking to the congregation was not only demystifying the experience, but gave a lot of credibility to it as a healing medicine.
Wow, that's really, really interesting. I'm so glad to hear he was featured in the New York Times. Was it an interview with him? Like, okay, George, walk us through what was the experience like, and he laid out the details there? Or how was the story framed?
The story was framed as a story about the emerging science and emerging healing properties of what was once illegal and is still illegal, but the science is there and the trials are there. And it was a personal interview with him about his experience as a child in the Holocaust and the death of his father and how he carried it with him for his entire life until he went through these journeys. And for many people, it's one or two times that they go through a psychedelic journey and they don't want to do it another 25 times. It's, as we say, dayenu. It would be enough. And it's enough for them. I think it's very individual. And I think it's very important that people take it on as something where they need professional guidance. And the last interview I did was with Francois Borzat with Reimagine. And it was fascinating because she runs the Center for Consciousness Medicine. And she and I had a really fascinating conversation about the people that she works with to create. She creates guides to do this work in the community, and she guides people herself. And just her personal experience with how impactful it's been on people's end of life and the stuff that they have, potentially been in therapy about, Chelsea, for their whole lives. People have been in therapy for 5 years, 10 years, 25 years. I know a psychedelic therapist who said to me, what he can do in a weekend with people would take 6 years sitting on a couch.
Wow, that is so interesting. And I believe it. Right? Because you're entering consciousness in a new way and you're exploring these quote unquote demons or issues or traumas that you've faced in a whole unique way. What's interesting, what comes up for me is, well, that sounds great. I would love to benefit from something in a weekend that I've been exploring for 6 years. I can, think of my issues off the top of my head. Comparison demons, wanting to explore career faster, harder, stronger, or whatever. Things in my early 20s that I feel like I've calmed down with, but things that are, when you grow in a spiral, right? You keep hitting your same things. And if you can explore this through psychedelics and get through your healing faster, wonderful. However, something about letting go and control comes up for me. I can't even imagine who would I even be if I did something that I've never done before. It's overwhelming. It's exciting. Have these feelings come up for you? Do people come to you and say, I'm interested, but I have no idea where to begin? What would you say to those people?
Well, I reflect on my own experience, which is I'm really interested, but I have fear around it because of all the layers of stuff that I grew up with, that we all grew up with, because we're all, if you grew up in this country, you grew up with that sense of this is your brain on drugs and not a delineation about it. Because who wants their teenagers to be doing drugs, quote unquote, any drug? So I think that the fear is real. And I also think what you said is interesting, Chelsea, about the spiral, which is if you know that you've been in therapy for 6 years with the same therapist and you're working through your stuff and you're getting places, but it doesn't feel fast enough, that becomes familiar. That becomes a familiar place of self-development and interior work. And it almost feels like, well, it's enough. It's enough. I'm moving slowly, but it's enough. Maybe I'll unearth this before I end up in the next realm. Maybe I won't. And it's scary to think of kind of being catapulted into another realm to do that work. So I get it. But I also, having been a rabbi for 25 years, get that the end is near. The end is near for all of us. And I don't mean that in a comedic way. I mean that I might not be here tomorrow. You might not be here tomorrow. I could live to be 100. You could live to be 100. But we can't be sure. And if you don't do the work, if not now, when? If not now, when? That's one of my favorite quotes, which it ends with "Matai," if not now, when? I think that's very important for us to recognize, because we like to pretend and we are a little more comfortable in denial about encountering the ending. which is universal,
Yes.
right? That's all we've got. We've got birth and we've got death. And those are pretty much the two universal shares that each human being has with one another.
You are speaking my language. These are the exact things I like to talk about. Hence the podcast. It all makes sense. Yeah. And I love to say, if not me, who? If not now, when? I mean, it's so true. And I love what you're saying about turning 100, because that's something that really, really interests me, right? Okay, let's say best case scenario, which, hey, maybe up for interpretation if that is even the best case scenario. But let's say for all intents and purposes, best case scenario, you live till 100. Okay. Well, guess what? A lot of people I know then are a third, a quarter, a half, 3/4 of their life are done if you do live to 100. That number, is finite. There's an end there. I mean, a lot of people, let's say listening, like I'm 30, people, if you're 30, okay, well, that could still be a third of your life is done. Not in a depressing way, not in a woe is me way, but just in a really interesting, I should think about that way, right? Because there's only so many years on this earth. And I think if we explored that more often and we're more present with that information as a culture, made death less taboo, we might explore our lives in a different way.
Absolutely, Chelsea. I couldn't agree with you more. And I would even shift that lens, because if you're 30, you could have 60 years left. I tend to think if you think about it in the look how much time has passed and the looking over your shoulder versus I still have 60 years to potentially change the world, change myself, to contribute. I am going to witness and be a part of something that is so incredible, that is just life, being alive. So if you're 80 and you're going to live to be 95, I still have 15 years left. Of course, you acknowledge the part in your brain which is like, I've already lived 85 years. But not to get caught in that groove of what you haven't done or regret or that downward spiral. Instead, being aspirational and inspirational about what you have left. And I also think that's where mentorship comes in. That so many people who are in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, they're not given the opportunity to share what they've learned along the way. Because we don't value aging in our culture. We value youthing. We get to a certain point, especially women, and it's, no, you should, if you're going to get that job, you should appear to be younger. I feel like I'm in you're in LA. You're in the epicenter of that world in many ways, not to be judgy about LA. Sure. My brother lives in LA, and it's an amazing city. But I'm acutely aware that I'm in one of the only careers where, for a woman, as you get older, you get better. I'm going gray, and I think that people give me a little bit more respect because I'm going gray and because I look my age. And I think that although I did an experiment once when I was in my 40s, I told people that I was 60. And they were like, that's amazing. You don't look a year over 50. And I was like, I'm 45. I hope I don't look a year over 50. But that whole thing about how we say we're younger than we are, I don't understand it. If you say you're older than you are, people think you're, in great shape. But if I said I was 35, people would say, wow.
Right. I love that. And yeah, what you're saying about, saying you're older, saying you're younger, for LA specifically, auditioning for commercials, they have you audition way younger. So like I could have an 8-year-old child, believably. Sure. But, I audition for sometimes these moms in detergent spots, and it says we want someone, 30 to 45, but then they're bringing in people that are like 25 and 30, because the whole thing is, if you use this product, look how good you'll look, which is false advertising, because the people are actually a lot younger than who they're advertising to, which is moms in the Midwest who are of an older age. So
right.
Advertising, baby.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I understand why people want to like Benjamin Button it in some weird way. Like they want to go backwards. People want to be getting younger every day, not older, because as I said, we don't value elders in a way that I think, at least in Judaism, and what I learned as a kid, and I still continue to teach, is how important our elders are. If we don't have the elders and we shelve them away in the way that we do in this country, then we are in a lot of trouble. And I think we are in a lot of trouble because we aren't depending on the wisdom, and we think of aging as negative instead of saging, which is positive.
Saging over aging. I Love that. And thank you for the work you're doing in including elders in your conversation and making that a point of contention, because you are so right. I think one of the main reasons elders are not valued as much in our culture is because we are not living with multiple generations. The idea of care homes, people are going into a care home, et cetera, et cetera. People aren't living with their grandparents. Whereas in other cultures, if you are living with grandparents or aging parents, you are physically seeing with your own two eyes what it is like for someone to slowly but surely make their way closer to death. I feel that I have that experience to a degree of watching my dad have ALS. And yet I also am guilty of not thinking about this as much in a way, because all of my grandparents died, either before I was born or in middle school or high school. My dad has died. I am not regularly communicating with anyone who is older. And that's hard. I mean, I'm sad about that. And yet that's not my fault because they died, et cetera, et cetera. But in general, the fact that people are moving to care homes, I think, is part of it. What do you think about that?
I think that we're living at a time in 2021 where we outsource so much. And unfortunately, we have the ability because of technology in many ways to outsource almost everything. And by that, and I think COVID kicked us into that realm even more than we realized. I'll just take an example. Like when I was growing up, if you wanted food delivered, you got a pizza. It was the pizza delivery from that pizzeria. And that's what you got. And imagine like that was what you could order in. And then you go today to the platforms like Uber Eats or Postmates, and just regularly you're clicking and your food's getting delivered. It's like there's all this idea of outsourcing the things that we used to do. And care is in that too, Chelsea. Like we are outsourcing care. So we are able, when people get sick and old, to have somebody else take care of them. And that's a value. Like we're going to put our parents in a place where they're going to be the most comfortable. Well, I don't know. I think that if grandparents lived with their grandchildren and their children and saw their great-grandchildren born, they might live longer and have more vibrant lives. But this idea of outsourcing care, it's because getting older and death itself is kind of yucky and freaks people out. And they don't see themselves in that role of caretaker if they can afford in some way to have somebody else take care of their loved one, even though respecting our elders and taking care of our parents and grandparents and our loved ones is so much a part of most faith cultures.
Really good point about outsourcing. I mean, it just keeps going and going. I mean, like, yeah, I had my vegetables from the farmer's market showed up at my door this morning. I have it delivered at like 5 a.m. I wake up, I open the door, and they're there. I mean, it's incredible, but you do need to look at, I mean, you need to keep an eye on all of this, right? Like, is outsourcing everything the best case scenario? No. And yet not taking it for granted, I think, is interesting.
I do want to say something. I think you just made a really good point about the what's happening with the evolution of time is convenience over connection. Convenience over connection. And I loved what you just said about your food from the farmer's market gets delivered to your door. We have a farmer's market here. You might even be familiar with it. The San Rafael Farmer's Market every Sunday and Thursday.
It's amazing.
Yes. And what I love about the farmer's market experience is that it doesn't arrive at my front door. And I go and I talk to, and they're not vendors. They're farmers. They're people who live close enough by on the land in California where they bring their food, and they have a relationship with the animals that produce the food. They have a relationship with the fruit that grows on their trees and those trees on their land. They have a relationship to the land. And I think outsourcing, even though we're actually not supposed to be talking about just that, I think actually that convenience versus connection has to do with almost every aspect of modern life. And I don't want to criticize what technology has gotten us to, and the app world, which is, as you said, we're like on the cutting edge of psychedelics. Well, there's an app for everything, right? And I think what's happening is there's a disintegration of relationships and connection as a result of the convenience. So you don't know who grew those vegetables, and you don't have to care about it because the broccoli and the asparagus and the cauliflower taste great, and you knew it was organic and locally sourced because it said so on the website, but you never get to meet the people and express your gratitude to them for the earth that they're working with and for the seeds that they planted and for the sustenance that they're giving you. And I think that disconnect is a result of how we rely on convenience.
long story long, I am a horrible person, and no, I'm glad that you said that. It's so true. Convenience over connection, it is a problem.
And it's about time too. It's about time because I can have a challah delivered on Friday to my house or to the synagogue, or I could spend 3 to 4 hours on Friday baking challah. And it takes up 4 hours. Who has 4 hours in the middle of the day? I make that happen most Fridays because it's talk about therapy. It's therapeutic for me to make challah. And then I get to make a lot of challah. And then I can just walk around and hand it to people who look like they might need a challah.
Do you make challah? I would love to eat your challah.
Well, you know what? Come on down to the houseboat and we'll have a little challah Shabbat.
I feel like
challah.
Challah, that would actually be so much fun. I feel like what comes to mind with all of this is balance. Balance is one of my favorite words and one of my favorite touchstones when I think of technology and all of the things happening with social media and online. I'm like, balance, balance, balance. It is not realistic, at least for me personally, to let go of all of that. And I think for a lot of individuals, it's related to their business at this point. Like, for better or worse, and often for worse, yeah, if you're not a part of these online communities, a lot of your jobs and opportunities will be affected. So, okay, like number one, that would be great if we can ever use it again. But number two, let's be realistic. If it's here, it's here, but balance. Can you turn your phone off for several hours over the weekend? Can you sometimes have things delivered, but sometimes still make a point of going to the farmer's market? Personally, certainly I do both. So the word balance, I think, is important as opposed to just outsourcing forever and not thinking about any of those things, even down to these interviews. Okay, my podcast used to be in person. Great. It is now virtual. There are a lot of incredible things. I've been able to talk to people I would not have had in LA, us talking right now in different cities. Amazing. Do I feel as connected to the people as I did in person? It's science. You don't. Like, you and I are connecting right now. I really like you. I'm really interested in you. This is fantastic. You are very memorable to me. And I think scientifically, if we were in person, we would connect even more. I think you would remember me even more. Do you know what I'm saying? Am I onto something? Do you agree?
You are onto something. And I want to go back and just say, I wasn't wanting to make you feel guilty or chastising
No.
modernity, because I do think that you're onto something with balance.
Yes.
Which is that it's not all or nothing. Of course, I'm guilty of using Uber Eats and Postmates too. And I've ordered a challah here or there. And I don't beat myself up about it because we are living in the modern world. And I'm not saying, I wasn't ordained as a rabbi in Neanderthal times. And I'm not saying we should all go back to Little House on the Prairie, which, by the way, was a television show. But I do think that balance of every once in a while, go check out where your food is grown, and having a relationship with the people makes a real difference. And I think that, yes, the amazing part of what COVID has done is given us this platform, this opportunity to connect virtually with people. And I think it's going to continue. And I think it's very important. I mean, we went online March 14th, 2020, and we are going to continue into the future as the Jewish people to live stream almost everything, because that is how many people connect now. And I also think it's important to encourage people to put their pants on and walk outside and go down the street and go grocery shopping at a local market or go to their synagogue, because look at our kids. They suffered so much from being virtual, and now everybody is very relieved that so many kids are back in person, because for so long it was get off the screen. And then for 18 months it was get back on the screen. You're missing your math. So I think there really is an importance in that idea of balance. And, I would say one of the greatest gifts that was given to the Jews, and I think that the Jews can offer in some ways to all of humanity, is the gift of Shabbat, the gift of the Sabbath. And it transcends time and space. And I like what you said about just turning off your cell phone for 3 or 4 hours on the weekend. I'm not going to tell people, start by turning everything off at sundown on Friday and don't turn anything back on until there's 3 stars in the sky at Havdalah on Saturday night at the end of Shabbat, because it's unrealistic for most people. But if you start, and I'm very much about ceremony and ritual, if you start a ritual in your family or in a couple or as an individual where you tune back into yourself, and you don't need psychedelics for this, you just need Shabbat. Although a lot of people do psychedelics on Shabbat. It's like, a good wine pairing. That's like, a good wine pairing or something. But I would just say, if you want to do something for yourself, give yourself the gift of tuning back into yourself and tuning away from your screens for just a period of time. Maybe it's Friday night, maybe it's Saturday, maybe it's Sunday. but to tune back in and tune out from the cacophony of stuff that we get dopamine rushes for, click, 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 click.
Yes, 100%. And that 3 hours is better than nothing. If you only do it for 1 hour, that's better than nothing. And I think people can get caught up in all or nothing mentality with so much of this. I binged on social media yesterday, so I feel horrible and I might as well just go on every day. Okay, that's cool. It's like, I don't know, binging, social media, dieting, anything. It's like being kind to yourself and taking small steps makes a huge difference. I'm currently reading the book Atomic Habits, and it's all about mindset shifts with small habits, one step at a time, which it's really interesting. So anyways, tangent. I'm going to ask you something else. Can you talk about your experience as a rabbi? What is the biggest misconception that you face as a female identifying rabbi? I know you go by she and they. And what is the most joy that you have? What is the biggest joy you receive from the work that you do?
At this point, I am 25 years into the rabbinate and 5 years of seminary. So 30 years of being a professional Jew, of being a rabbi. And I'll start out with the joy and the meaning. For me, having been at one synagogue at Temple Emanu-El in San Francisco for 25 years means that I have had this incredible blessing of sharing so many life cycles with the same people. Baby namings, brises, bar and bat mitzvah, weddings, and funerals. And that is a profoundly intimate relationship to go through those life cycles, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think the preconceived notion that people have just in general is that the worst part of my job is funerals and going through grief with people. And in fact, it's been some of the best, most meaningful, and in some ways joyful part of my rabbinate that I've had the opportunity to go through that passage of time at the other end with people and to offer comfort, offer some joy. There is humor even in that experience for many people. So I would say I do get I didn't know women could be rabbis still to this day.
Still? Oh my goodness.
Still, or people will say like, I didn't know that women could wear that little hat. So there's a lot of preconceived notions about, women clergy in general. There's a piece in one of my, I have a one-woman show. There's a piece of my show where somebody sees me going into the synagogue on a Tuesday and they don't understand what I'm doing in the synagogue on Tuesday. And I say, well, do you know that I'm a rabbi at Temple Emanu-El? I know you work here. Well, why wouldn't I be here on a Tuesday? And this was many years ago. She said, I thought you led services on Friday night. I thought you did a bar bat mitzvah on Saturday, and then you were playing golf with my husband's priest on Sunday, and that was pretty much it. Like that's a rabbi's because people ask me all the time, why did you become a rabbi? And I think what they're actually asking is, what does a rabbi do? Because people can't imagine, because they say like, well, do you have another job? As if it isn't taking up 24/7 of your life when, our congregation has almost 2,000 families. So that's almost 5,000 people. And we have a very robust, amazing group of clergy to serve that community. But it's a 24/7 career and calling in many ways.
Yes. Can you talk about a few of the pillars that are under the umbrella of your work as a rabbi?
Yes. So as I said, I do all kinds of life cycle events for people. Baby namings, brises, bar mitzvahs, weddings, funerals, memorial services. I also do a lot of interfaith work, a lot of social justice work in the community, the Bay Area community and in the country. I do a lot of education. I write sermons for Friday nights and for the high holy days to hopefully inspire people to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted, is what I like to say.
Love
which
that.
I didn't make up. Somebody else made that up a long time ago. And a lot is very relational. There's a lot of standing up in front of people, now virtually and in person, but there's also a lot of intimate relationships that you build with people who are on their own spiritual quests. I also love doing retreats. I think that in-person nature of doing something over Shabbat for a weekend with people really deeply intensifies and opens them up to their own spiritual path.
Very cool. What kind of retreats are you doing? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I think just the idea of retreating is so fascinating because it means that you're taking yourself outside of what your daily grind is. And so
Yes.
we do family retreats. I'm now creating a retreat that involves Jewish spirituality and nature, music, and yoga that's going to be in Alaska this summer. And it's going to be the first time I'm running a retreat in Alaska. You know what they call the Jews in Alaska is the frozen chosen.
I'm obsessed with that. Okay, someone said that to me the other day. So I don't know, was there just an article about that or something? Because I think that's so funny. There's only 2 synagogues in the entire state of Alaska, someone told me as well.
Yes, I think one in Juneau and one in Anchorage. But, you know, people from Minnesota get angry because they like to call themselves the frozen chosen, not Alaska.
Right.
So I think there's like, you know, there's a frozen controversy there.
Do you have to be a part of your congregation to do this retreat?
No, you don't have to be a congregant. You just have to be somebody who's Jewy, Jewish, or Jewish. And, you know, that's the other thing is that Judaism is not a proselytizing religion. But I think that we can do a lot better creating different portals, more innovative in creating portals for people to feel like, you know, one of the misconceptions is you can't be a Jew if you don't have a Jewish mother. That's very old in the past.
Yes.
It's, you know, but I mean, there are traditional Jews who still believe that and live that way, but there's many more progressive Jews who are actually really opening the doors wider and wider and saying, you know, that we're a very small tribe, but we are a welcoming tribe.
Yes. And it's interesting you say that it is a very small tribe, but it feels like everyone's Jewish when you live in like Los Angeles, San Francisco, or New York, but less than 2% of the entire population on earth is Jewish, which I find fascinating. I didn't even know that till I was in probably my early 20s and my mind was absolutely blown. Nearly 1 in 4 people on this earth are Muslim and less than 2% of the earth are Jewish. It's really interesting.
Yes, we are a minority religion. And we have loud voices in the spaces we occupy.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Yep. Well said. Yep. That's fair. That is fair. I have some, I have like some jokes I do for stand-up related to Judaism. I won't do them now, but I echo that sentiment. Something I'd like to ask you, and we don't need to, look, I don't want to put you on the spot about anything politically, but I do want to ask, you know, Jews have been in the news in different ways this past year. I think a lot of my friends personally have struggled with their Jewish identity. Do you have any advice or suggestions as to how people can work through as they learn more about the communities and how they struggle with their own identity in relationship to what's happening in the world?
Yes, I think that's a great question because we're all struggling with the notion of the individual versus community. And I think that by living in isolation or in quarantine or not being in person for so long has given people a lot to struggle about and a lot to yearn for, whether it's their own immediate family or extended community members they haven't seen for a long time. And, you know, I think that community is so important. And I think that with the rise of anti-Semitism and politically the shift that happened, I have to say, it didn't just happen for 4 years. It happened before Trump was president, and it's continuing into this administration, the shift to the right. And that if you are a member of any minority in this country, you are feeling it. And the Jews have been feeling a sense of vulnerability for about 4,000 years. Today is no different. And I would just express an aspiration that we can be less insular and insulated and more welcoming. And I would encourage people to do some research and speak to people who are more knowledgeable than them about Israel and about the Middle East. And that's one of the places that's a real touch point for me, where people have a lot of opinions, Jews and non-Jews, yet they have never been anywhere in the Middle East, and they couldn't even find Israel on a map if they needed to. And I'm very progressive when it comes to my Zionism. I'm a struggling Zionist, and I think that it's very important for people to educate themselves. And what we talked about at the beginning, finding mentors and figuring things out, not feeling like you're so alone, and not feeling like, or getting involved with people who are going to chastise you or make you feel like you're not Jewish enough, or that you should be doing something better or bigger or more, that you're fine where you are. And I think that we need to meet people where they are more than asking them to change immediately in order to become a part of who we are.
I love that. That was really beautiful. Thank you for answering that question. And I agree with what you said about people. You know, I have a lot more to learn. We all do. But a lot of people that, you know, have chimed in about Israel, like you said, have never been there, don't know where it is, have never voiced their concern until recently. It's like, I can't even imagine what it must be like, you know, as a rabbi, what this year has brought on, what these kinds of conversations have brought on. How do you take care of yourself during these conversations? I imagine there's probably been some pretty heavy ones, or people disagreeing with you or wanting you to have a certain point of view or address something in your sermon. How do you take care of yourself in those moments?
I'm a big talker, and I've learned to be a better listener. And I think sometimes instead of jumping in and defending or being defensive or answering a question, that I take a deep breath and I actually count to 10 and I let more stuff come out so that I'm deeply understanding what somebody is asking of me or what emotion is actually being expressed when they're talking to me and they're upset or there's conflict. And so becoming a better listener has actually been something that I feel takes care of me. I also, living on a houseboat, when things even virtually are hard for me, I jump out the window and I get on a paddleboard and I go paddleboarding out, even just for 15 minutes. And being out in nature for me with the birds and the fish and the jellyfish and the leopard sharks and the rays, it brings me back to myself, which I think is really important. And I also think having aspirations are very important and inspirations. So I like to say I'm an aspiring meditator because
Yes,
I
that.
try to take it seriously. And I have to stop trying so hard and just doing it more, and that's what I aspire to. It's like I'm gluten-free aspirational, which means a lot of the time I'm gluten-free, but sometimes pizza just looks too good, and I don't want to feel like I'm punishing myself. So I think being gentle with ourselves and being an inspiration and feeling aspirational about our values and the way we want to be and who we want to be in the world is really important, and that's an element of taking care of yourself.
Beautiful. I love the words you're using with gluten-free aspirational. In terms of aspiring meditator, I say, I'm not woo-woo, but I'm a little bit, so I'm woo, right? Same thing. I'm like, yes, I am in this world adjacent. Yes, here we are. I meditate every day for 10 minutes, not for an hour. That's okay. We are all doing great. Shout out to the Calm app. Can people thrive in personal relationships and friendships who fundamentally disagree on their political or religious values?
So hard.
Do you
It
like that I
depends
just
what you
ended
mean
with
by,
that? Just like a big
yes,
one thrown in there?
it depends what you mean by thrive. I think that if you are comfortable with conflict, if you understand all relationships are complex and you're willing to go there, I think anything is possible. I think that, interfaith, people use the word interfaith marriage or interfaith relationships when people have two different faiths. But the word mixed marriage is everybody's marriage or relationship, because religion is just one place, Chelsea. I mean, like two different religions, but two people of the same religion, two Jews or two Muslims or two Christians could be married to each other, and they have vastly different relationships to their parents, or they have vastly different relationships to money, which is three-dimensional, not two-dimensional. And so I think the idea of you have to unpack like interfaith as just one part of the mixture that people bring to their relationships. And yeah, I think politics, religion, finances, beliefs, values, there is a certain level to which they can be distinct and different. But I think, when you hear about people who were like Biden versus Trump in one relationship and it was like World War III, I also think that's real. I think if the fundamental values are not shared, very difficult.
Yeah. So many more questions on that, but we'll save it for a part 2 one day. But that was very well said and helpful. How have you personally explored the intersection of comedy and grief? I know you've done a one-man show. I know you have lost your father. Can you talk about some of those experiences and how you've used comedy to cope?
People are sometimes surprised when I say I tell jokes or use humor in eulogies. But I find that laughter and tears are just two sides of the same emotion, which is, having your heart open and really feeling. And my experience is that life is full of grief and life is full of joy. And so the laughter and the tears are sometimes something that we have no control over. Most of the times when you laugh or you cry, you're not really in control and you don't want to be. So for me, part of my one-woman show is exploring the nature of grief and humor. And it's hard work dealing with grief and also wanting to be able to tell jokes or tell stories that are funny. It doesn't always work, but I think that it's a big part of my rabbinate and ended up being a big part of my one-woman show, which is called You May Think I'm Funny, but it's not, because there is so much, as I said to you, about the kind of the misconceptions or preconceptions of what a rabbi does. But I, as a kid, really wanted to be a stand-up comic. And Gilda
Really?
Radner was Gilda Radner was my favorite. I loved all comics, but especially Jewish comics. And I thought about being a stand-up comic. And I also really had a calling to be a rabbi. So I kept thinking, well, should I be a stand-up comic or a rabbi? And I met with some comedians and they said, it's really hard when you have 3 people in the audience or they're heckling you or you just can't even get a gig. And I thought, wait a minute, if I'm a rabbi and a stand-up comic, every Friday night, I have a built-in audience. And so I decided to be both and be all and not make that choice of should I be a rabbi or a stand-up comic, but to infuse humor, levity, and joy with meaning and wisdom and depth.
So beautiful. And congratulations on having your one woman show exist in this world. There's so many people who aspire to have something like that. You've done it, you're doing it, and I hope to see it one of these days in one of these cities. Is that something you think you would reprise?
I am working on it now, and it was going to be traveling as of June 2020, and we all know where we were in June 2020. And so I did it at a theater here in San Francisco, several theaters, and I'm hoping to move it to your neck of the woods, to Los Angeles and to New York in the coming year.
Amazing. Well, please keep me updated and put me on your list. I would love to come. That would be such a joy to me to see that. So
I will. Well, it's been great. It's been great talking to you. It was a wonderful interview. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I'm going to let you go in just a minute. And first, I'm just going to wrap this up and say, can you share a book, podcast, or film that has impacted you some way with the intersection of grief and spirituality or Judaism? And where can people connect with you online?
I'm going to go way into the past. And when I think about grief and love, I think about this incredible movie called Harold and Maude. And if you haven't seen Harold and Maude, it was an iconic cult movie that I started watching when I was in high school. And I've continued watching for the last 40 years of my life. So I would recommend Harold and Maude, which I watched it so many times that when I came back to it about 15 years ago, I had forgotten that the elderly woman in it was a Holocaust survivor.
Wow.
So I think it's probably something that impacted me as a much younger person. I love that movie. It's a dark comedy in some ways about death and love. And what was your second question?
Where can people connect with you online or learn more about your one-woman show and your programming with psychedelics and grief?
You can check out my new website, rabbisidney.com, and my nonprofit is called 13thtribe.org. You can also find me sometimes in person at Temple Emanu-El in San Francisco, where I've been a rabbi for the past 25 years.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rabbi Sydney, for sharing all of your wisdom. I'm really looking forward to publishing this. It was so much fun getting to talk with you.
Great to meet you and to be with you today.
Yodo, you only die once. Thanks so much for being here, everyone. Wasn't that just amazing? I learned so much. It's a pleasure to have you here. And stick around for next week. We'll be talking with producer and editor Emily Trio, who I met while working at BuzzFeed. We'll be talking about losing your twin brother at 23 to an accidental overdose. And this is our first time exploring twin loss specifically, and I'm really grateful Emily shared her story, so that will be next week. If you like this episode, sharing with a friend means a lot, as does leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. That's a really awesome gift you can give to an indie podcaster such as myself, and I'm always happy to return the favor to you as well. Hit me up on the gram at Dying of Laughter Podcast if you want to chat further, and thanks for being here. Yodo, you only die once.